The air is thick with putrid humidity. The cedar walls smell of lingering venison and decay. Darkness crowds into the corners, shrinking away from the hungry candlelight. Heat crawls down your skin, summoning creeping sweat in its wake. The cabin needs no visible threat to hold you captive. And thus, Inscryption begins. Inscryption is a deck-building roguelike game that begins with the player trapped in a log cabin, forced to play a progression of card battles against their captor. The player's main focus is collecting cards with high damage values, exploring possible synergies to gain the advantage in fights, as death comes with a heavy price. As the player progresses through their captor's game map, pieces of the narrative start to surface, giving context to the player's situation and hinting toward an escape route. When I first played Inscryption, one of the design choices that caught my eye was the game's high stakes. The game is excellent at demonstrating exactly what is at stake, motivating the player to learn the mechanics to protect their progress. In every card battle, your opponent keeps score with a set of scales that show how much damage has been taken on either side. From a balanced state, each side needs to score 5 damage in order to win. Each point of damage is represented by a tooth on the scale, reinforcing the gruesome stakes of the game. One item the player can receive is a pair of pliers, whose application is not readily apparent. However, when activated during a card battle, the player extracts their own tooth to set it on the scale, simulating 1 point of damage in their favor. This item reminds the player that in this game, sacrifices must be made to win. Nothing is off limits when your life is on the line. Inscryption reinforces this idea of sacrifice through the quite literal sacrifice mechanic. In order to play most damage-dealing cards, another card must be sacrificed, completely erasing it from the board for that battle. There is one card that exists purely to be sacrificed, the Squirrel card. A Squirrel card's only purpose is either to be sacrificed, or to tank damage inflicted by other cards. Each turn, the player is given a choice. Either they can draw a squirrel from a deck of purely squirrels, or they can draw a random card from their creature deck. In battles, the player must use discretion every turn, keeping enough squirrels in their hand to sacrifice, while simultaneously maintaining enough creatures on the board to do damage to their opponent. The sacrifice mechanic becomes more complex when the player owns cards that demand multiple sacrifices. These cards inflict major damage, but are hard to play on the board due to their high cost. Some cards do not require sacrifices to be played. Rather, they require bones. Bones are gathered after any one of the player's cards dies and are used as a currency of sorts. These two mechanics exhibit Inscryption's design philosophy. In order to gain something useful, one must lose something in return. Although law-centered mechanics may not seem traditionally fun, the sense of tension they create is deeply immersive. During battles, I constantly felt on edge, knowing that a single misplay could cost me the deck I had spent hours assembling. The cards I collected felt like friends, allies in captivity. I didn't want to lose them due to my own lack of a forethought. I mean, that was my Mantis God card that I buffed with, albeit unreasonable, damage values. Next run, there's a chance I won't even get to see that card again. Because of this loss aversion, I learned the mechanics thoroughly and held on to my cards with a white-knuckled grip. Sometimes this wasn't fun, but it was intense. There's a strange kind of fun in desperation, the kind you feel during a flawless raid attempt or when you're being chased by the entire enemy team. It's a kind of fun that comes from walking a tightrope and almost losing your balance, but recovering. This type of exhilaration isn't for everyone, and when done incorrectly can become stressful instead of enjoyable. However, Inscryption walks the line between intensity and stress quite masterfully, resulting in a thrilling experience that doesn't feel too punishing. As I progressed through Inscryption's storyline, the mechanics remained consistent, but my motivation for playing changed. I became familiar with the game, creating decks with synergies that were both efficient and powerful. I'd experienced enough of the story to where I wanted more. I wanted to expand my knowledge beyond the basics. Instead of playing to experience, I started playing to master. Previously, I sought to just stay alive in battles, respecting my opponent's cards out of caution. In the pursuit of mastery, however, I sought not only to kill, but overkill. This motivation was enabled by Inscryption's endless mode that's currently still in beta, Kaycee's mod. Kaycee's mod is nearly identical to the first section of the base game, except it doesn't punish the player for progressing too quickly. In this mode, I was able to refine the skills I had learned without the stakes of the base game. I experimented with deck compositions, learning the strengths and weaknesses of each deck. I knew the bosses like the back of my hand, and prepared for their nuanced mechanics ahead of time. It no longer felt like the game was controlled by my opponent. This time, it was my game. One of the ways my pursuit of mastery manifested was through my use of overkill. In Inscryption, the player only needs to deal 5 damage to a set of balance scales in order to win. Any damage inflicted beyond 5 grants a player teeth, which are used as a type of currency. In the base game, I would choose to simply do 5 damage, take the win, and walk away. In Kaycee's mod, I would choose to inflict 4, then play my most dangerous cards for maximum overkill. I became familiar with the scales, calculating exactly how much damage I could take before dying, and narrowly dancing around that number. In the pursuit of mastery, the stakes were not as visceral. Death was no longer a grievous threat, but an inconvenience. I learned the pattern of receiving 3 damage but inflicting 4, causing my AI opponent to surrender every other battle due to my slow but inevitable victory. Through this mastery stage, I found fun in pushing the limits. I wanted to see exactly how far I could go before the game told me to stop. And to my chagrin, it was surprisingly far. I was allowed to play a Mantis God who struck the board 3 times, doing 5 damage each strike. I was allowed to kill bosses in 1 turn and was even rewarded with the boss's shocked reaction. However, none of these factors made me unkillable. The cost of an overpowered card is leaving the rest of your deck underpowered, forcing you to hopefully draw your extremely powerful Mantis God on your first turn, or stall until you do so. This dynamic caused me to feel like a glass cannon, dealing absurd amounts of damage but prone to shattering after 1 reckless decision. As I continued to test the maximum amount of damage I could inflict in 1 turn, and how quickly I could speed through the game, I discovered that I was only playing the game for the mechanics. I was just playing the game to play it, forgetting the story that gave the mechanics their purpose. I had a similar experience while playing the game Loop Hero, which I bought on sale a few weeks ago. Loop Hero is an endless deck builder, where you play a hero following a circular path and fighting monsters. This game is different from most deck builders since, as a player, you are responsible for dropping monsters into the hero's path. When the hero successfully kills a monster, it drops armor and weapons, helping the hero survive the next loop. At the beginning of this game, when the mechanics are still new and fresh, the game is enjoyable. Loop Hero sports a nostalgic 8-bit aesthetic, complete with eerie music that enforces the primordial mystery of the game. The mechanics are addictive, and as the health of the hero drains and monsters crowd in every cranny of the map, the player can't help but root for the hero's success. However, after an hour and a half of playing, I paused. Why was I playing this game? I couldn't answer. I might have said, I enjoy the mechanics, but in reality, I exited the game with the same level of happiness I entered with. The mechanics weren't enjoyable, I just engaged with them because they were there. Steam user Vantier describes the sensation perfectly in his review of Loop Hero. The game is extremely well made and super addictive, but that doesn't make it fun. Kind of like how a song you hate can still be catchy and get stuck in your head. I think way too many people get the idea that if they played a game for 5+ hours, that must mean they enjoyed it, and then try to rationalize how it was actually fun after the fact. I encountered this same dilemma while playing Loop Hero. I played it, I wanted to keep playing it, but I had to confront myself on why. The game lacked a story that gave the mechanics purpose, leaving me to rationalize why I should keep playing. After mastering the mechanics of Inscryption, I was left with a choice. I could either continue playing the game purely for its mechanics, or I could attempt to rediscover why I enjoyed playing the game in the first place. And thus, I restarted. I found strong cards and lost them. I died due to small oversights. I was punished for going too quickly, a mechanic I never realized was protecting me from myself. I explored the cabin's cedar walls, remembering the smell of venison and decay. I enjoyed the music, allowing the hum of the flute and plucked strings to increase my immersion, rather than ignoring them. I remembered why I played Inscryption in the first place. In this second playthrough, I still developed a few glass cannons, dealing unreasonable damage at times. Even so, I never lost touch with the story that made these mechanics meaningful. I believe it's important to consider why we play the games that we do. Do you play games for the thrill of being neck and neck with your opponent? Do you find genuine fun in games you play? Or do you just play them because they're a part of your game library? Have the games you've experienced changed the way you think about the world? These questions may help players discern why they continue to play certain games, and whether these games are actually fun or just ways to kill time. I started playing Inscryption because it kept me on the edge of my seat, but as time passed, I started to miss the forest for the trees. In order to remember why I chose to play Inscryption in the first place, I had to stop playing, realize why I wasn't having fun, and start over with a new, fresh perspective. Sometimes, to have fun again, you have to stop playing the game whatsoever. And sometimes, all it takes is a new deck.